The whole town laughed at his double cabin idea until the first real blizzard arrived and the valley went silent. An old veteran in a thick red and black buffalo plaid flannel jacket built a second cabin around his own, like armor made of pine. Folks in Marquette, Michigan called it wasteful, ridiculous, a lonely man's winter madness. But when their chimneys cracked, their doors froze shut, and the cold started taking names, the only smoke still rising was from his ridge. And then his German shepherd heard the first knock in the storm, soft, desperate human. What happened next turned one man's strange shelter into the last warm heartbeat of an entire community. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below, because it's wild how far these winter stories travel. Winter arrived early in Marquette, Michigan, with wind off Lake Superior sharp enough to peel breath from lungs and turn silence into something that hurt. Walter Hayes lived where the pines thinned into rock and snow, a mile above town, in a cabin that leaned slightly east as if bracing itself against whatever storms still remembered how to climb. He was 72 years old, tall once but now slightly stooped, his frame still broad through the shoulders from a lifetime of carrying weight that had nothing to do with wood. His face was cut deep with lines, the kind that did not come from age alone but from years squinting into sun-glare deserts and white-blind winters alike. A square jaw softened by time, gray stubble that never quite disappeared even when he shaved, and eyes the pale, watchful blue of men who had learned early that looking away could cost lives. Over everything he wore the same thing he always wore when the cold meant business: a thick red and black buffalo plaid flannel jacket, heavy as a promise, frayed at the cuffs, patched at one elbow, still holding the faint smell of smoke and oil. That jacket had crossed oceans with him, slept in foxholes, and stood between him and frostbite more times than he cared to count. At his side moved Shadow, a German shepherd nearing 9 years old, large and angular, with a grizzled dark muzzle and alert amber eyes that never stopped measuring distance. Shadow's coat was a mix of charcoal and ash gray, thickened by winter, and his movements were deliberate, economical, as if energy were something to be spent only when necessary. He did not bark without reason. He did not run unless Walter ran. And when the wind screamed down the ridge, Shadow planted himself between his owner and the open door, body angled like a shield. Walter had not planned on building a second cabin. He had planned on surviving the winter quietly, the way he survived most things, without witnesses and without explanations. But the cold had been changing. He felt it first in the floorboards, which stayed cold even after the stove had been burning all night, then in the way frost crept along the seams of the walls like a slow, white infection. He remembered another kind of cold from years ago, the kind that slipped through armor and uniforms and into bone, the kind that killed men who were technically still breathing. Back then, the lesson had been simple. It was never the explosion that got you, never the obvious threat, but the small oversight, the gap no one thought mattered. So when September came and the leaves were still falling in polite colors, Walter began cutting extra timber. The men in town noticed first. Marquette was small enough that patterns were currency, and a man cutting twice the wood he needed was bound to be discussed. At the supply store, Tom Wilkins laughed openly, a thick-necked man in his 50s with permanently reddened cheeks and a voice that carried like he enjoyed taking up space. Tom had a soft middle and sharp opinions, the kind of man who leaned on counters with familiarity and spoke as if the world owed him agreement. "You building a fort up there, Walt?" he'd said, chuckling as he rang up nails. Planning to host the whole damn county? Walter had nodded once, neither agreeing nor denying, his expression unreadable. He had never learned how to fill silence for comfort, and he had no interest in starting now. By October, the rumors had sharpened. People drove up the ridge just to look. What they saw made them laugh harder. Walter was building a second structure around the first, not a true cabin by any town standard, but a thick, low shell of pine logs and rough boards that hugged the original walls tightly, leaving only a narrow gap between inner and outer skins. There was no stove planned for it, no chimney, no windows. 2 front doors, one facing the wind, another just behind it, like a doubled heartbeat. To the townsfolk, it looked absurd. Like a man had put a coat on his house and forgotten that houses didn't get cold. Sarah Miller was one of the quieter voices in town, a widow in her early 40s who worked the library desk and kept her dark blonde hair braided tight down her back, as if order might keep the world from slipping further. She was slim, pale-skinned, with tired hazel eyes and hands always ink-smudged from repairing old books. When she mentioned Walter's project one afternoon, she didn't laugh. She frowned. "Maybe he knows something," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. But her voice was lost under louder ones. "He's gone strange," someone replied. "War does that." Walter heard the laughter sometimes, carried up the ridge by clear air and cold nights. He did not react. His inner world was a quieter place than people assumed, built of routines and memories that rose uninvited. He remembered a winter overseas when a young corporal froze to death inside a tent because someone hadn't sealed a seam properly. He remembered standing there afterward, staring at the small mistake that had taken a life, and promising himself never again. Each log he lifted now felt like penance and preparation at the same time. Shadow watched everything. When strangers came too close, he stood, ears forward, tail low, a silent warning. When Walter grew too tired, Shadow nudged his leg, a reminder to eat, to rest, to live long enough to finish what he'd started. By early November, snow dusted the ground for good, and the wind off the lake began to howl with purpose. The shell was nearly complete. People placed bets on how long it would last. Someone said it would collapse under its own weight. Someone else said Walter wouldn't make it through December. Walter sealed the final boards with hands that shook not from fear, but from exhaustion, leaning his forehead briefly against the wood when it was done. Inside the inner cabin, the air already felt different, quieter. Still. He sat by the stove that night. Shadow stretched along his boots and listened to the wind test the outer walls. For the first time in weeks, it did not find a way in. Walter closed his eyes and felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief exactly, but confirmation. The laughter from town drifted faintly through the trees, thin and brittle as the first ice on water. He let it pass. He had built enough shelters in his life to know when one mattered. Outside, the storm gathered itself, patient and vast, unaware that someone on a ridge had finally learned how to say no to the cold. The storm arrived without ceremony, the way truly dangerous things always did, not with warning, but with intent, sliding down from Lake Superior like a living weight. Snow began as a whisper, then thickened into sheets that erased distance and swallowed sound. By dusk, the ridge above Marquette had vanished entirely, replaced by a wall of white that pressed against the world as if trying to push it back into the lake. Walter Hayes was still outside when the wind sharpened into something feral, driving ice sideways hard enough to sting through wool and flannel. He stood braced against the outer shell of his cabin, shoulders squared, hammer rising and falling with the stubborn rhythm of a man who understood deadlines that were not written on calendars. His hands were split and bleeding, red lines running through pale skin, but he worked as if pain were simply another weather condition. The buffalo plaid jacket hung heavy on him now, soaked with snowmelt that froze almost instantly, stiffening the fabric until it felt like armor. Shadow stayed pressed to his left leg, muscles taut beneath thick fur, positioning himself instinctively to break the wind. The dog's ears flattened when the gusts screamed through the trees, but he did not retreat. He had learned long ago that Walter never stepped back unless there was no other choice. The outer shell was still missing boards near the east-facing corner, a flaw Walter had planned to finish in the morning, back when morning had felt like a guarantee. Now it felt like a gamble. Each gap howled as the wind found it, cold fingers probing for entry. Walter drove the final nails in with a precision that came from muscle memory rather than sight, eyes narrowed against blowing snow, breath rasping in his chest. He remembered a night decades earlier when a storm had collapsed a temporary shelter overseas because someone had assumed the weather would wait. It hadn't then. It wouldn't now. When the last board went up, Walter leaned his forehead briefly against the wood, not in relief but in acknowledgement. Inside the inner cabin, the stove was already burning, the iron body ticking softly as it expanded. The air felt different the moment he stepped through both doors, a strange stillness settling in his bones. Shadow shook snow from his coat and settled by the threshold, blocking it with his bulk as if daring the cold to try again. The storm did not stop. It intensified. Through the night, the wind hammered the outer walls with a sound like surf breaking against cliffs. Snow piled so high against the shell that the lower boards vanished completely. Walter sat awake by the stove, feeding it sparingly, measuring each log like a ration. He had always been good at that, at knowing when to spend and when to save. The dead airspace between the two cabins trapped the cold the way water trapped light, dulling it, stealing its edge. By morning, frost coated the inside of the outer shell, silver and thick, but the inner walls stayed dry. Walter ran a hand over them once, slow and deliberate, as if confirming the presence of something fragile but real. Down in town, panic bloomed. Roofs groaned under the weight of snow, chimneys cracked, doors warped and froze shut. Tom Wilkins' house lost heat before dawn, and by noon he was burning a dining chair he had inherited from his father, swearing at the stove as if it were a disobedient animal. Sarah Miller watched the storm from the library's upper window until the glass frosted over. She stood wrapped in a wool shawl that hung loose over her narrow shoulders, her braid already dusted white from the walk-in. Her face, pale and fine-boned, carried a tightness around the eyes that came not from cold but from calculation. She thought of Walter on the ridge, alone, and felt a twist of unease she couldn't quite name. By the second day, the road to the ridge was gone entirely, buried beneath drifts that rose taller than fence posts. People spoke of Walter as if he were already dead. Someone claimed they'd seen part of the outer shell collapse. Someone else said the smoke had stopped. No one verified anything. Survival made cowards of curiosity. And yet, every morning, a thin column of gray smoke climbed into the white sky from the direction of the ridge. It did not waver. It did not thin. It rose steady and stubborn, a vertical line drawn against the storm. Inside his cabin, Walter adjusted his routines. He no longer fed the stove through the night. He didn't need to. The trapped air held enough warmth that the floorboards no longer bit through his boots. Shadow slept deeply for the first time in days, legs twitching occasionally as if chasing something warm and impossible. Walter found himself listening for sounds he had not expected to hear: the absence of wind inside the walls, the soft settling of wood as it flexed but did not fail. He ate simply, dried meat and broth, mindful of supplies, but without the gnawing anxiety he had felt in past winters. On the third morning, he opened the outer door cautiously and was met with a wall of snow. It took an hour of careful shoveling just to clear enough space to breathe properly, the shell acting like a cave mouth, protected from collapse by its doubled structure. As he worked, Walter noticed something else. Tracks near the tree line, half buried but unmistakably human. Someone had come close during the night and turned back. He felt a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with cold. Shadow sniffed the air and whined softly, tail low, eyes fixed on the forest. Walter laid a hand on the dog's neck, steadying both of them. He understood then what the smoke meant. It was no longer just proof of survival. It was a signal. That realization sat heavy with him as the storm stretched into its fourth day. He thought of men he had lost because they had been visible, because warmth and light had drawn attention they could not afford. He thought of doors he had closed in other lives to protect what little remained. That night, as the wind finally began to ease, Walter sat by the stove and stared at the inner door, the one that led deeper into safety. He knew with a certainty that felt almost physical that the double cabin had already changed something, not just for him. When the storm broke at last, it did not end cleanly. It faded, leaving behind a landscape that looked shattered and reborn at the same time. The town emerged slowly, damaged and exhausted. People noticed the ridge again. They noticed the smoke that had never stopped. The laughter that had once drifted upward felt thin now, brittle, like ice underfoot. Walter stood at his window, Shadow at his side, watching the valley come back into focus. He did not smile. He did not feel vindicated. He felt prepared, which was something else entirely, something heavier. He closed the inner door gently and began stacking wood for the days ahead, aware that the storm had only proven one thing. Winter had noticed him, and it would not be finished so easily. The knock came on the 16th night, soft enough that it almost blended with the settling wood, polite in a way that made Walter's spine stiffen. It was not the sound of a man in panic or a fist driven by hunger, but the careful tap of someone who still believed manners might keep them alive. Walter rose from his chair slowly, joints protesting, and felt Shadow tense before the sound fully registered. The dog's ears lifted, his body angling toward the outer door, not aggressive, not fearful, simply alert in the way only animals that had learned to read desperation could be. Walter opened the outer door a fraction and was met by the smell of snow-soaked wool and cold breath. A teenage girl stood there, no more than 16, thin to the point of fragility, her dark hair braided poorly and stiff with frost. Her cheeks were raw and blotched red, lips cracked and blue, eyes wide but steady with the kind of resolve that came from being the last one standing. Beside her was a boy of maybe 7, small even for his age, his body swaying as if the wind had already claimed him. His gloves were gone, fingers mottled purple and white, and he leaned heavily against his sister's hip without seeming to know he was doing it. Shadow stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Walter and the children, chest out, breath slow, amber eyes scanning them for threat. Then the boy coughed, a wet, rattling sound that cut through the cold like glass, and Shadow's posture shifted, tension draining just enough to allow space. The girl swallowed hard. "I heard you were warm," she said, voice hoarse but controlled. Walter did not answer immediately. He had learned that silence was sometimes the only way to hear the truth. He opened the outer door fully and stepped aside, allowing them into the shell, the narrow space between the two cabins where the air was cold but no longer lethal. He closed the door behind them and locked it, the sound final in a way that made the girl flinch. He handed her a blanket through the crack of the inner door without looking directly at her, pointing to the bench along the wall, wood cold beneath the thin layer of frost. "Sit," he said quietly. "Stay there." That night, Walter did not sleep. He sat by the stove, listening to the muffled breathing on the other side of the inner wall, counting it, measuring its steadiness like he once counted heartbeats in triage tents long ago. He knew this moment. He had lived it in different forms, in different places, every time a line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed. By morning, the girl and her brother were still there, wrapped tightly together, frost clinging to the edges of the blanket. The boy's breathing was shallow now, lips trembling with each exhale. Walter stood there for a long moment, hands resting on the doorframe, the weight of the decision pressing down on him until it felt physical. Then he opened the inner door and stepped into the shell. "Inside," he said, barely above a whisper. The girl's eyes widened. She did not argue. She gathered her brother carefully, cradling him with surprising strength, and followed Walter into the warmth. When the heat hit her face, she sank to her knees, a sound escaping her throat that was half sob, half apology. Her name was Emily Carter, she said later, her voice steadier once she'd warmed enough to speak. She was tall for her age but painfully thin, with straight dark hair and skin pale beneath layers of grime and cold. There was a sharpness to her features that suggested she might grow into someone formidable if given the chance. Her brother, Noah, was small and light, his hair a soft brown mess against his forehead, his body burning with fever beneath skin gone cold at the edges. Their father had died 3 days earlier, walking to the river for water when the ice broke under him. Their mother had stopped speaking after that. Retreating into a silence Emily did not know how to breach. Walter listened without comment as he ladled broth into chipped mugs, setting one near Emily and carefully bringing the other to Noah's lips. Shadow lay nearby, watching them with a seriousness that bordered on reverence, head resting on his paws, but eyes never closing. Emily did not ask to stay. She did not plead. She offered instead, voice low and steady. "I can help, I can cook, I can clean, I can do whatever you need." Walter nodded once. "You'll do what you're told," he said, "and you'll keep quiet when you can't." By the third day, word had spread. Smoke had always been a signal, but now it had meaning attached to it. People began to appear at the edge of the trees, hesitant shapes that lingered just far enough away to retreat if turned back. Walter did not invite them in. He watched. He measured. When he allowed entry, it was only into the shell, never all at once, never without rules. He rotated them through in pairs, using heated stones wrapped in old wool to fight the worst of the chill, rationing space the way one rationed time. Among the first was Margaret Lowe, a woman in her late 60s with a back bent by years of laundry work, her gray hair cut short and uneven, as if scissors had been a luxury. She spoke little, but her eyes were sharp, taking in everything, hands always busy mending seams or folding cloth. Then came Daniel Price, a man in his 30s with a heavy beard and a scar that pulled the left side of his mouth down into a permanent frown, the result of a logging accident years earlier that had left him wary and slow to trust. He carried guilt like a second pack, having lost his wife to pneumonia the previous winter, and he moved through the shell like someone afraid to take up too much space. Shadow became something else entirely during those days. He no longer slept deeply. He paced, listening, alerting Walter to approaching footsteps long before they could be seen. At night, he lay across the threshold of the inner door, body forming a barrier that was both physical and symbolic. Walter found himself watching the dog with a mix of gratitude and unease, aware that Shadow had accepted a role that mirrored his own too closely for comfort. Each knock tightened something in Walter's chest. Each decision weighed heavier than the last. He began to understand that warmth, once shared, became a kind of debt that could never be fully repaid. By the end of the week, the shell had become known as the waiting place. People did not speak loudly there. They sat wrapped in borrowed wool, breath fogging the air, eyes tracking the door as if it were an altar. Walter enforced silence not out of cruelty, but necessity. He needed to hear the forest, to catch the sound of another approach, another need. Emily moved through the space like she had been born into it, tending Noah with quiet competence, helping Margaret with her stitching, listening more than speaking. There was steel beneath her thinness. Walter saw that now, forged by loss and sharpened by responsibility. One night, as Walter fed the stove, he realized something that chilled him more than the wind ever had. The warmth he had built was no longer just protection. It was a choice others would judge, measure themselves against, resent when denied. The shell did not just keep people alive. It decided who lived long enough to hope. He sat with that thought until dawn, Shadow's steady breathing at his feet, and understood that winter had not finished testing him. It had only changed its tactics. The double cabin stopped being a shelter and became a system sometime after the third sunrise with strangers breathing inside its walls. Walter Hayes noticed the change not in the numbers, but in the silence. People no longer asked where to sit or when to speak. They waited. They watched him. They watched the stove. They watched the dog. Rules emerged the way frost did, gradually, without announcement, settling into every crack. There were hours for entering the shell, and hours for leaving it. Hours when the inner door stayed shut, no matter who knocked. Hours when the stove was fed, and hours when it was left alone to breathe on its own heat. Walter wrote nothing down. He didn't need to. He had learned long ago that real order lived in repetition, not ink. Emily Carter absorbed the structure faster than anyone. She moved with a quiet efficiency that belied her age, shoulders squared now, dark braid tucked neatly under a borrowed cap, her thin frame hardened by purpose. She spoke gently to Noah, whose fever had broken but left him weak, his small body folded close to the stove like a question mark. Margaret Lowe took charge of mending, her bent back straightening when her hands worked, gray hair pulled back with a strip of cloth, eyes sharp as needles. Daniel Price chopped wood without being asked, his heavy beard frosting over in the cold, scarred mouth set in concentration, as if each swing of the axe were a confession he hadn't found words for. And then Tom Wilkins arrived. He did not knock loudly. He stood in the snow with his hat in his hands, thick neck bare to the wind, cheeks red and cracked, eyes avoiding the chimney, as if ashamed of having followed the smoke. He looked smaller somehow, his broad laugh stripped from him by hunger and fear. When Walter opened the outer door, Tom swallowed hard and said nothing. He simply held out his gloves, palms up, a silent offering. Walter studied him for a long moment, noting the tremor in his fingers, the way his shoulders hunched inward as if bracing for a blow. Whatever arrogance Tom had once worn had been burned away, likely in the same stove he'd cursed days earlier. Walter handed him an axe. No speech, no forgiveness spoken aloud. Just the weight of wood and steel passed from one man to another. Tom nodded, eyes wet, and went to work. The illness crept in quietly, the way all real threats did. It started with a cough in the shell, a wet sound that lingered too long, then a fever in a man who had rotated through 2 nights earlier. Walter noticed patterns the way other men noticed faces. He counted hours. He remembered who had shared blankets, who had passed mugs hand to hand. The decision came to him fully formed, unwelcome but unavoidable. He closed the inner door. He gathered everyone in the shell and spoke with a voice that did not rise but carried nonetheless. "We're separating," he said. "Children and the weak inside. Everyone else rotates out here. No exceptions." There was murmuring, fear flickering like flame. Emily stiffened, instinctively pulling Noah closer. Margaret pressed her lips together, nodding once. Daniel exhaled slowly, already resigned. Tom took a step forward, then stopped himself, jaw clenched. Walter continued, "If this spreads inside, we lose everyone. I won't let that happen." It was not a debate. It was a command, and the part of Walter shaped by war slid into place around it, hard and precise. Shadow sensed the shift immediately. He repositioned himself, no longer just guarding the inner door, but patrolling the shell, his large frame moving in steady loops, ears tuned to every cough, every stumble. His fur had thickened further, a grizzled ridge along his back catching the light. His age showing now in the stiffness of his rear legs, but his presence alone seemed to quiet panic. When someone began to argue, Shadow stopped in front of them and stared, not threatening, just present, reminding them of boundaries they hadn't built but now depended on. The quarantine held. The stove burned hotter now, fed by twice the wood, and the air grew thick with smoke and sweat. Walter rationed fuel with ruthless precision, marking the stack with chalk lines, calculating days the way he once calculated ammunition. He slept in short bursts, never more than an hour at a time, listening for changes in breathing, for the sound of someone collapsing. Outside the shell, the valley suffered. Smoke no longer rose from many chimneys. Walter buried the dead when he could, marking graves with stones and bits of scrap wood, his hands steady even when his chest ached. He did not pray. He had learned that prayers were promises you might not be able to keep. Instead, he worked. Sarah Miller came up the ridge on the 10th day of the quarantine, her thin boots soaked through, her braid undone and tangled by wind. She looked smaller than Walter remembered. Pale skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, eyes rimmed red from sleeplessness. She carried a satchel slung across her chest, heavy with books and paper. When Walter opened the outer door, she stopped short, startled by Shadow's bulk, then recovered quickly, lifting her chin. "I can help," she said, voice steady despite the cold. "I've been tending to the sick in town. I know how to keep records, who's been where, when." Walter considered her, noting the way she met his gaze without flinching, the quiet resolve beneath her exhaustion. He let her in. Sarah worked methodically, setting up a corner of the shell as a triage space, her long fingers moving with surprising confidence as she took temperatures, wiped foreheads, recorded symptoms on scraps of paper weighted down by stones. She spoke softly, never promising more than she could deliver, her presence calming in a way that felt earned. Ruthless practicality defined the days that followed. Walter enforced rotations with military clarity. Those strong enough stayed in the shell, taking shifts warming by the stove when needed. Children and the elderly remained inside, sealed away behind the inner door. No one liked it. No one questioned it after the first night passed without a new fever. Tom Wilkins took charge of the wood crews, his voice hoarse but authoritative, something in him reshaped by loss into usefulness. Daniel Price stood watch with Shadow during the longest nights, two silent sentinels sharing the same cold air. Emily learned to boil water carefully, stretching supplies, her thin arms steady as she carried pots heavier than she should have been able to lift. Noah slept more now, color returning slowly to his cheeks, his small hand sometimes clutching the edge of Walter's jacket when nightmares woke him. No one died inside the double cabin. Outside, the snow kept falling, indifferent. Walter did not mark the passing days anymore. He measured survival instead, one breath, one log, one decision at a time. Standing in the shell one night, listening to the layered breathing of people who were no longer strangers, he realized the truth he had been avoiding. The cabin was no longer his. It belonged to every choice made within it, to every life balanced against another. He accepted that quietly, the way he accepted most things, by continuing to do the work. Spring came late to Marquette, not as a celebration, but as a cautious negotiation. The snow did not vanish so much as retreat, peeling back inch by inch to reveal what it had covered and what it had taken. Graves appeared first, marked with stones and scraps of wood behind the ridge, the ground around them still frozen hard enough to resist shovels. Then came the scars on the cabin itself, deep axe marks in logs, warped boards, seams swollen from months of pressure, and finally the people, blinking into longer days like survivors of a long-held breath. Walter Hayes stood at the woodpile as he always had, splitting logs with measured swings, the red and black buffalo plaid flannel jacket still draped over his shoulders, the cuffs darker now from smoke and wear. He looked thinner than he had in autumn, his face more sharply defined, gray stubble thicker, eyes set deeper under a brow that had learned how to stay watchful without appearing so. Shadow lay near the door, older now in ways that showed when he rose slower to stand, careful with his back legs, but no less devoted. His muzzle had gone lighter at the edges, silver threading through the dark, and he still placed himself between the door and the wind out of habit, even when the air had softened enough to smell wet earth beneath the snow. The double cabin had not returned to being Walter's. If anything, it had expanded in meaning. People came daily, first from nearby ridges, then from farther valleys, trudging through slush to see it with their own eyes. They ran gloved hands along the outer shell, peered into the dead air gap with reverence, knocked on the doubled doors as if testing a legend. They asked questions not about survival now, but about method. How thick were the walls? How wide the gap? Which boards warped first? Which seams needed tar or cloth? Walter answered when it mattered and stayed silent when it didn't. He had learned that explanations could turn sacred things into commodities too quickly. Sarah Miller took to organizing the requests with quiet authority. She had cut her hair shorter after winter, dark blonde strands now brushing her jaw, her face still pale but steadier. The tightness around her eyes eased into something like resolve. She wore a simple coat cinched at the waist that emphasized her slim build, and she carried a ledger made from salvaged paper, recording names and questions and where people came from. There was a confidence to her now that hadn't been there before, a calm born of competence earned under pressure. When people grew impatient, she met their gaze evenly and reminded them that no one owed them answers. Emily Carter helped where she could, taller now somehow, her posture straighter, her thinness tempered by strength gained from work rather than desperation. She had let her braid grow longer, tying it neatly each morning before chores, and she spoke with a clarity that surprised those who remembered her first arrival. Noah followed her everywhere, cheeks still round but healthier, eyes bright, his small hand often finding the edge of Walter's jacket without thinking. He slept through the night now. Daniel Price remained mostly quiet, but his beard was trimmed for the first time since winter began, revealing the scar along his mouth more clearly. It made his expression look permanently severe, but his actions told a different story. He taught others how to fell trees safely in thawing ground, his voice steady, his patience hard-earned. Tom Wilkins had changed the most visibly. He had lost weight, his thick neck leaner now, his movements purposeful. He no longer laughed loudly. When he spoke, it was measured, often deferential, as if the winter had taught him the cost of noise. He led crews building second shells across the valley, his hands rough and cracked, his eyes always flicking toward the sky as if expecting it to turn on them again. New structures began to rise, some crude, some thoughtful, all inspired by the same principle. Cabins sprouted skirts of wood, barns grew wraps, even sheds gained outer skins, leaving narrow corridors of trapped air between layers. People called them double cabins at first, then simply shells. The idea traveled faster than Walter ever had. Letters arrived from towns beyond the county, asking for sketches, for measurements, for permission. One man arrived with money folded thick in his pocket, offering to buy the cabin outright, to dismantle it and rebuild it elsewhere as a monument. Walter pointed him toward the graves behind the pines and said nothing more. The man left before sundown. On a morning when the ground finally softened enough to release its grip, Walter and Sarah stood near the ridge watching meltwater carve paths through snowbanks. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, sharp and clean. Sarah broke the silence. "They'll want you to teach," she said gently. "To go places. Speak." Walter wiped his hands on his jacket and shook his head once. "I don't leave in winter," he said, then paused. "Or for winters." Sarah smiled faintly, understanding. She had learned, as he had, that presence mattered more than explanation. Shadow shifted at Walter's feet, tail thumping once against the boards, contentment mixed with vigilance. The dog's age showed now when he slept, dreams shorter, breaths deeper, but he remained where he belonged, guarding a threshold that had outgrown any single person. As weeks passed, the valley grew louder, more alive. Children played near the shell, weaving blankets into makeshift forts between beams, whispering secrets as if the space itself demanded reverence. One little girl asked Walter if the cabin had 2 birthdays, one for each wall. He surprised himself by laughing, a short sound that startled even Shadow. "Something like that," he said. When autumn hinted at its return, earlier than anyone liked, people prepared differently. Woodpiles doubled. Seams were sealed before frost appeared. The community met not to celebrate survival, but to plan for it. Walter watched them work and felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest, not pride, not relief, but a quiet certainty. He had built more than he needed because he had known loss came without warning. The winter had tested that belief and found it sound. On the first cold night of the new season, Walter fed the stove and closed the inner door, listening as the wind tested the outer shell and failed. Shadow lay down with a sigh, the door at his back, eyes half closed. Outside, snow began again, light and tentative, as if remembering what had happened the last time it tried. Inside, the warmth held. Walter rested his hand on the edge of the table, steady, and thought of the lesson he would never stop repeating. Not aloud, but in every board laid before need demanded it. Survival was not about building just enough for today. It was about daring to build more than you thought you deserved for a tomorrow you might never see, and doing it anyway. In the end, the miracle was never the wood, the walls, or the warmth. The miracle was that God whispered preparation into one man's heart before the storm ever arrived, and that man listened. Sometimes God doesn't stop the winter. Sometimes He teaches one quiet soul how to build shelter before the cold takes names. Sometimes the blessing is not rescue, but foresight. Not comfort, but courage. Not abundance in the moment, but wisdom ahead of time. In our daily lives, we often laugh at preparation. We delay kindness. We postpone faith. We build only what feels necessary for today and call it enough. And then life changes overnight. Illness, loss, loneliness, storms we never saw coming. This story reminds us that what we build in silence, patience, compassion, readiness, love may one day become the shelter someone else is praying for. If this story moved you, let it be more than a story. Share it with someone who might need hope tonight. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, your city, your state, your country. And if you believe stories can still carry light in dark seasons, subscribe to the channel so we can keep telling them together. May God bless you and your family. May He give you wisdom before the storm, strength during it, and peace when it passes. And may you always be someone who builds more love than the world expects before it's needed.